Hey everyone, every time Trump does something controversial in international politics, that discussion arises. Trump is destroying the world order. Trump doesn't respect the rules. Trump is a danger to global stability. But what if I told you that Trump isn't the cause of the problems, but rather the consequence? What if I told you that Trump came to power precisely because the international system had already been broken for a long time? Today we're going to understand how the failure of international institutions, popular frustration with globalization, and the elite's inability to solve real problems created the Trump phenomenon. The system was already broken. Let's start with a simple question. When was the last time an international organization actually solved a serious problem? Did the UN prevent any wars? Did the WTO resolve trade disputes fairly? Did the IMF help countries in crisis without creating more problems? The truth is that long before Trump came to power, international institutions had already lost credibility and effectiveness. The UN couldn't prevent genocides, invasions, or regional conflicts. The WTO allowed China to manipulate the trade system for decades. The IMF imposed policies that often worsened economic crises. For the average American citizen, these institutions became synonymous with inefficient bureaucracy that consumes resources without delivering results. Worse yet, many times these institutions seem to work against American interests, benefiting countries that didn't follow the same rules. Frustration with globalization. Now let's talk about something that political and academic elites were slow to understand. Globalization created winners and losers, and the losers got very angry. The American industrial worker. Imagine you've worked in a factory in the American Midwest for 20 years. Suddenly, your company decides to move production to China because labor is cheaper there. You lose your job. The government says, "Don't worry, this is good for the global economy. It will create more jobs in the service sector." But the new jobs pay less and require qualifications you don't have. Then someone explains that this happened because there are WTO rules that allow free trade. But you discover that China doesn't follow the same rules. It subsidizes its companies, manipulates its currency, steals American technology, and nothing happens to China. The rules only apply to Americans. The unfulfilled promise for decades, politicians from both parties promised that globalization would benefit everyone, that integrating China into the world trade system would make it more democratic, that free trade would create prosperity for all. What really happened? China became richer and more authoritarian. Millions of American industrial jobs disappeared. The American middle class stagnated economically while global elites got richer. The China example. Let's talk specifically about China, because it's the clearest example of how the international system failed. In the 1990s and 2000s, the American strategy was clear. Integrate China into the global economic system, hoping this would lead to political democratization. The idea was that as the Chinese became richer and more connected to the world, they would naturally demand more political freedom. The opposite happened. China used access to Western markets to strengthen itself economically, but became even more politically authoritarian. Worse, it began using its economic strength to influence other countries and challenge the international order. Rules only for one-side China entered the WTO in 2001 with specific commitments: open its markets, respect intellectual property, not subsidize state enterprises. It systematically violated all these commitments. And what happened? Nothing. International institutions proved incapable of making China comply with the rules. Meanwhile, American companies trying to compete in the Chinese market faced barriers, were forced to transfer technology, and suffered systematic industrial espionage. The electoral response. After decades of watching this movie, the American voter reached a simple conclusion. The system doesn't work for them. The rules only apply to Americans, while other countries do whatever they want without consequences. It's not that the American voter is against international trade or cooperation. The problem is they saw decades of agreements that benefited other countries at the expense of American workers. They saw China strengthen itself using methods that would be unacceptable if used by the United States. When Trump appeared saying America first, and promising he wouldn't be limited by rules that other countries ignore, this made sense to millions of Americans. Finally, someone was speaking the language they understood. If the rules don't work for everyone, then let's play by the rules that actually exist. The rules of power. Trump as a symptom. Trump didn't invent American unilateralism. He didn't create distrust in international institutions. He simply channeled a frustration that had existed for decades. Previous presidents also violated rules. Bush invaded Iraq without UN authorization. Obama used drones to kill people in countries the United States wasn't officially at war with. Clinton bombed Yugoslavia without international authorization. The difference is they did this while paying lip service to international institutions. Trump was the first president to openly say what everyone already knew. International rules only work when convenient for great powers. When they're not convenient, they're ignored. The only difference is Trump stopped pretending it was different. The global phenomenon. Trump is what happens when a system loses legitimacy. When institutions can't solve real problems, leaders emerge who promise to solve these problems by other means. And it's not just in the United States. The same phenomenon is happening worldwide. Why did the British vote to leave the European Union? Because they felt European institutions didn't respond to their concerns. Uncontrolled immigration, loss of sovereignty, Brussels bureaucracy making decisions that affected their lives. Populist parties are growing throughout Europe. Germany, France, Italy, Poland, Hungary. Why? Because traditional parties, committed to international institutions, can't solve problems like immigration, security, and unfair economic competition. In all these cases, populism emerges when there's a gap between what institutions promise and what they deliver. When elites get stuck in systems that don't work, voters choose leaders who promise to break these systems. The predictable outcome. Anyone who understood geopolitics could have predicted the emergence of leaders like Trump. When you have ineffective international institutions, rules that only apply to some countries, elites who ignore the costs of globalization for ordinary workers, adversaries who exploit the system without fulfilling their obligations. It was inevitable that a leader would emerge promising to play by the same rules that adversaries were already using. If American elites had continued pretending the system worked, while China and Russia exploited it more and more, the result would be the gradual decline of American power. Trump may be controversial, but at least he's trying to adapt American strategy to the reality of the world. Conclusion. Trump didn't destroy the international order. He just stopped pretending it still existed. The system had been broken for decades, kept alive only by bureaucratic inertia and the elite's reluctance to admit failure. The real question isn't whether Trump is right or wrong. The question is, what comes next? Are we going to try to fix the international system? Or are we going to accept that we've returned to a world where power determines the rules? One thing is certain. We can't go back to the make-believe world where we pretended the rules worked while some countries systematically ignored them. Did you like the analysis? Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Do you think Trump is a cause or consequence of international problems? See you next time.